2, 3. Here, we're on. Hey, everybody, how you doing? Thanks for turning out tonight. Did you have some fun with the traffic out there? So, what is it? What's going on? Football game. Is it Big Ten? It's like a playoff thingy. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a big sports guy. Couldn't you tell? So, who's never been to one of our shows before? Raise your hand. Okay, a few newcomers. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Welcome. And we'll get started here in a minute. I'm Bob Sander, your MC for this night. Standing here next to me, to my left, is Joyce Ellinger. We'll give Joyce a round of applause. Joyce has been using us for 33 plus years to learn how to craft her trade. And we think she's pretty darn good at it by now. So be sure and keep your eye both on the storyteller but also on Joyce in the course of the evening. It's really amazing to watch. So I need to thank some sponsors. I want to thank the Historical Society. Here we are in their beautiful facility. We'll give a round of applause right now. This evening's sponsor is John and Carol Brown, and they are here tonight. John and Carol, wherever you're seated out here, stand up so we can all look at you. There they are right over yonder. The family of Michael O'Brien, we will give them a round of applause as well. They've been a sponsor for decades. I am here tonight courtesy of Paradox Dental Center. And the Chatham Tap is sponsoring our videographer up yonder. We'll turn around and stare at him for just a minute. Hey, thanks for your good work. So he's also making available this show for anybody who's watching it on Zoom at home. Jim Obermeyer and Sally Perkins are responsible for helping bring Miss Poetry in Motion onto the stage here tonight. Thank you, Jim and Sally. And yes. So, it's that time of the year when we will ask you for money, just out of the goodness of your heart. I know you paid to get in here tonight, but if you would like to make a donation to help support the work that we do, not just for these evenings when we get to be together, but for the whole year, there's a whole retinue of programs that we offer. And think about that. We'll have a break here midway through the evening. You can fill out the green form that you all walked in with and put your $20 bill on that form and put it in the glass fish bowl, and we will draw your green card, and you will get 2 tickets to an upcoming show. Sound okay? Right. You don't have to put a 20 in there. It's all right. 50s are fine, though. We will have an intermission. Jennifer said the first half. We're losing it here. 40 to 45 minutes worth, and then we'll take about a 15-minute break where you can have some coffee or tea, and there's some goodies up there you can snack on as well. Likewise, I think Jennifer retail goods, and we have some retail goods, and you can browse all of those things for Christmas coming right up around the corner. Now appropriate to nothing, I just remembered it. Heard this just the other day. It's an old lady sitting on the seashore. Sorry, Jennifer, I just got to get this out of my system. And her little daughter is in her lap when a giant wave hits the beach. And when the wave recedes, her little girl is washed to sea and she's gone. And the woman looks up at the sky and says, Lord God above, my granddaughter means everything to me. Please return her. This is not right for her to be cut so short in her life. And another wave comes. She says, if this is my daughter in this wave, I'll never ask you for another thing in my life. And indeed, the wave crashes over her. And when it recedes, there's her granddaughter back in her lap again. And she looks up and she says, she had a hat. Okay. Well, so thank you. It's been 4 years, sorry. I just had, you have to, it's like a burp. You have to. It was 4 years ago when we were all just delighted to have Jennifer Munro here last. And then COVID intervened, and I got to talking with her a little bit before the show tonight. We're just kind of exchanging the vagaries of being a storyteller, performing storyteller, and trying to do your work in the midst of COVID. Maybe some of you even took in some of our shows by Zoom, which we did some of those. And I myself worked at schools through Zoom, which was tough, to say the least, you know. But it's just glorious to have her back here with us again, live in the theater. So you can see her the way we all saw her the first time. She just lights up the stage. She grew up in the Midlands in England, the same place where the author of the story she's going to tell tonight, Charles Dickens, is from. She's the recipient of the Circle of Excellence Award, National Storytelling Organization. And aren't we proud and glad to have her here on our stage tonight? Let's give her a great welcome, shall we? Jennifer, come on out.
Marley? Oh, Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. He and Scrooge were friends for I don't know how many years, and Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, sole friend and sole mourner. And even he wasn't so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that on the day of the funeral was an excellent man of business and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Scrooge had never painted out old Marley's name. There it sat years afterwards over the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley's. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. But he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. But he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, secret and solitary as an oyster. But once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, Scrooge sat in his counting house. Oh, he kept the door of his office open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a cell, a sort of little tank beyond, was busy copying letters. Now, Scrooge's fire was small, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller, it looked like only one coal. But of course he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal scuttle in his office. So Bob Cratchit had put on his comforter and tried to warm his hands at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed miserably. Merry Christmas, Uncle. God save you. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so suddenly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. Bah, said Scrooge. Humbug. Christmas a humbug, Uncle. You don't mean that, I'm sure. I do. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough. Come now, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough. Scrooge, having no better answer on the spur of the moment, answered again with bah, and followed it up with humbug. You're right. Don't be cross, Uncle. Well, what else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding, and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. So he should. Uncle, nephew, you keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine. Yes, but that's just it. You don't keep it. Well, let me leave it alone. Much good it has done you. Much good it will ever do you. Well, I dare say there are many things from which I have derived good, by which I have not profited. Well, Christmas among the rest. But I've always looked on Christmas as a good time, a kind, forgiving time. Well, the only time in the long calendar of the year when men and women open up their hearts and look upon people beneath them as if they were really fellow passengers on the way to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And so, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good and will do me good. And you know what? I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded, becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, poked the fire and extinguished the last frail coal forever. And let me hear another sound from you, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. Oh, you're a very powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. But Scrooge said he would see him in... Yes, he went the full length of the expression. He said he would see him in that extremity first. I am heartily sorry to find you so resolute, but I'm going to keep my Christmas spirit until the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon. In letting himself out, Scrooge's nephew let two other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold. They were carrying papers and books and pens. One looked at a list and then said, Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the honor of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley's been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night. Oh, well, I am sure his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. It certainly was. They had been two kindred spirits. The ominous word liberality. Scrooge glanced at the credentials he'd been given, shook his head, and handed them back. At this liberal time of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at this present time. Are there no prisons? Oh, but plenty of prisons. And the union workhouses are still in operation. They are. I wish I could say they were not. And the poor law and the treadmill are both in full vigor. Oh, yes, sir. Both very active. Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it, gentlemen. I help support those institutions I just mentioned. And those people who are badly off must go there. But many can't go there, and the many would rather die. Well, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Well, seeing that it was useless to press their point, the gentlemen withdrew, and Scrooge returned to his labors with an improved opinion of himself. Meanwhile, outside, the fog and darkness thickened, and it came time for shutting up the counting house. With an ill will, Scrooge tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk. Bob Cratchit put on his hat and instantly snuffed out the candle. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose." "If quite convenient, sir." "Well, it's not convenient, and it's not fair. You'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound, if I were to stop you £0.50 for it." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet, you don't think me ill-used when I have to pay a day's wages for no work." The clerk pointed out that it was only once a year. "Oh, a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." Bob Cratchit promised that he would. He shut up the counting house in the twinkling of an eye, and then the two men went their separate ways. But Scrooge took his usual melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern and whiled away the evening reading the newspapers and poring over his banker's books. And then he went home to bed. Now, he lived in rooms that had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were old and gloomy enough now, for nobody else lived in them but Scrooge, all the other rooms being let out as offices. And now it is a fact that there was nothing particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was rather large. And also, let it be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought upon Jacob Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that very afternoon, and then let any man or woman explain to me, if he or she can, how it was that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. As Scrooge stared fixedly at this phenomenon again, it became a door knocker. Now, to say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a sensation to which it had been a stranger since infancy, would have been untrue. But he put his hand back upon the key resolutely, unlocked the door, in he went, locked the door behind him, lit his candle, and up the stairs he went. Before he shut his heavy door, he walked through all his rooms to make sure that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to want to do that. When he was quite satisfied, he locked the door. Double locked it, which was not his custom. And then he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown, his nightcap, and sat down to take his gruel. Now, it was a very low fire, nothing indeed on such a bitter night. He had to sit very close to it to extract the least sensation of warmth. When he had finished his gruel, he leant back against the chair, and his eye happened to settle upon a disused bell pull in the corner of the room. And it was with a strange and inexplicable dread that as he looked, it began to swing. And soon it rang out, as did every bell in the house. Now, this might have gone on for half a minute. To Scrooge, it was more like an hour. And then suddenly, they ceased as they had begun, together. Now, this was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if someone were dragging a heavy chain across the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. The cellar door opened with a booming sound, and then he heard the sound, louder, coming up the stairs, coming on toward his door. "I won't believe it." But his face lost its colour when, without pause, it came on through the heavy door and stood before him in the room. The fire in the fireplace leapt up as if it cried, "Marley's ghost! I know him!" and fell again. And it was Marley. Marley, in his usual pigtail, waistcoat, tights and boots. And now the chain he wore was wound about his middle and extended behind him like a long tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it carefully, of keys, ledgers, cash boxes, and heavy purses wrought in steel. Now the body was transparent, so that looking through, Scrooge could quite clearly see the coat buttons on the coat behind. Now, he'd often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but had never believed it until now. And no, he didn't believe it now. "How now?" said Scrooge, cold and caustic as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who or what are you?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. I see you don't believe in me." "I don't." "Why would you doubt your senses?" "Well, because a slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. Or you might be a bit of undigested beef, a fragment of an underdone potato, a blot of mustard. Oh, there's more about gravy than of grave about you, whoever you are." Well, at this, the spectre set up such a frightful cry and shook its chains with such a horrible and threatening sound that Scrooge fell upon his knees before him. "Mercy! Ancient spirit, why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man that the spirit within him walk abroad among his fellow men and bring about happiness. And if it goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. Oh, woe is me!" "You are fettered. Tell me why." "I made the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you, or would you know the length and weight of the heavy coil you bear yourself? Oh, it is a ponderous chain." Well, Scrooge looked about him on the floor, expecting to see some 40 or 50 fathoms of iron cable, but saw it not. "Oh, speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none to give. It belongs to other ministers. Oh, a little more time is all permitted. Weary journeys lie before me. I am here tonight to tell you that you have a hope and chance of avoiding my fate, a hope and chance of my procuring Ebenezer." "Oh, I thank ye, Jacob. You were always a good friend to me." You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Scrooge's countenance fell. Oh, I think I'd rather not. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow on the stroke of 1. Or couldn't I take 'em all at once, Jacob? Get 'em over with? Expect the second on the next night, and the third on the next night, when the last stroke of 12 ceases to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and for your own sake, remember what has passed between us. As it spoke, the spectre stepped backward toward the window, and with each step the window opened itself just a little, so that by the time he reached it, it was wide open. He beckoned Scrooge to come and look out, which Scrooge did. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither, moaning as they went. They all wore chains like Marley's. Some, they might be guilty governments, were bound together. None was free, and the misery with them all was that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, but had lost the power forever. Soon the mist enshrouded them, and their spirit voices faded, and the evening became as it had when Scrooge walked home, and being from the emotion he had undergone, much in need of repose, went straight to bed and fell asleep upon the instant. When he awoke, he listened for the hour. At length it struck out in a low, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in an instant, and an unseen hand uncurtained his bed curtains. Starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, Scrooge found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who had drawn them. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me? I am. The voice was soft and gentle. Who or what are you? I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? Oh no, your past. The phantom reached out, took him gently by the arm. Come, rise, walk with me. At the words, they passed on through the wall and found themselves on a country road with fields on either side. Oh, good heavens, said Scrooge. I was bred in this place. I was a boy here. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating through the air, each one connected to 1,000 thoughts of hopes, cares, and joys long, long forgotten. As they walked along the country road, Scrooge recognized every gate, post, and tree. And soon some shaggy ponies were coming toward them with boys upon their backs. The boys were shouting to one another so that the fields rang with their merry music. These are but the shadows that have been. They have no consciousness of us. As the boys came on, Scrooge knew and named every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why was his heart filled with gladness when he heard them give one another Merry Christmas as they separated at the crossroads? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas. The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child neglected by his friends, remains there still. Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the country road and then followed a lane that led to a dull brick mansion. Inside, they entered a long, dark, melancholy room. At the far end, a small boy sat reading by a feeble fire. Scrooge sat down upon a bench and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. The ghost smiled thoughtfully. Let us see another Christmas. At the words, Scrooge's former self grew larger, the room darker and dingier. Scrooge was not reading now, but he was all alone, as he had been before. But he was walking up and down despairingly, and Scrooge looked toward the door and shook his head sorrowfully. Soon the door swung open, and in ran a little girl who threw her arms about the boy and, kissing him 12 times, cried, "I've come to take you home, dear brother." Home, little Fan? Yes, home, once and for all. Why, Father, it's ever so much kinder than he used to be that I wasn't afraid to ask him once again if you might come home. And he said yes. And he sent me in a coach to fetch you. Oh, and you're never to come back here again, but you're to be a man. Oh, but first we're going to have the merriest Christmas in the world. Well, you're quite a woman, little Fan. In her childish glee, she took his hand and dragged him toward the door. He, nothing loath to go, accompanied her. She was always a fragile creature, whom a breath might have withered. Oh, but she had a generous heart. That she did, Spirit. I'll not gainsay it, that she did. She died, a woman, I believe, and had children. Yes, one child. Ah, yes, your nephew. Scrooge looked uneasy in his mind, but answered in the affirmative. And though they had that moment just left the school, they now were on the busy thoroughfares of a city. The ghost stopped outside of a warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he recognized it. Know it? Was I apprenticed here? Inside, they saw an old gentleman wearing a Welsh wig, sitting at a high desk. Oh, it's old Fezziwig. It's old Fezziwig alive again. Oh, bless his heart. Well, old Fezziwig put down his pen, looked up at the clock, and then shouted out in a rich, oily, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho, Ebenezer Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice. Oh, it's Dick Wilkins, to be sure. Oh, dear me. Oh, he was very fond of me, was Dick. Dear, dear. Christmas Eve, Ebenezer. Christmas, Dick. No more work tonight. Clear away, my lads. Clear away. It was done in the twinkling of an eye, and soon the warehouse was as big, as gay, as dry a ballroom as you would wish to see on a winter's night. In came the fiddler with his music book, went up to the desk and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable, followed by the 6 young fellows whose hearts they broke. In came all the men and women employed in the business. And then the music began, and away they all went, 20 couple at once, old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting out. Soon, all top couples and not a bottom one to help them out. When this result came about, old Fezziwig clapped his hands and cried, "Well done!" and the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter specifically provided for that purpose. Well, there was more dancing and games and forfeits, and there was cake and plenty of ale. And at the end of the evening, Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig stood either side of the door, shook every individual by hand, and wished him or her a Merry Christmas. A small matter, observed the ghost, to make these foolish folk so full of gratitude. Small, echoed Scrooge. He felt the spirits glance upon him. What is the matter? Nothing. Nothing particular. Something, I think. No, I would just like to have a word or two with my clerk just now. That is all. Again, the ghost smiled. Let us move on. My time grows short. Well, time passed, and Scrooge saw himself now a man in the prime of his life. His face did not have the rigid and harsh lines of later years, but had begun to show the signs of care and avarice. He was not alone, but he was sitting beside a beautiful young girl. It was clear she had been weeping. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in the years to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? A golden one. Our contract is an old one. When it was made, we were both poor and content to be so. You are changed. When it was made, you were a different man. I was a boy. Your own heart tells you that you are not now what you were then. Can even I believe that if you were free today, tomorrow, you who weigh everything by gain would marry a dowerless girl? No. So for the love of him you once were, I release you. She rose, and they parted. Spirit, show me no more. Why do you delight to torture me? One shadow more. No, I don't wish to see it. But the ghost was relentless and forced him to watch what happened next. They were in a room. It wasn't very large or handsome, but it was full of comfort. And near the fire, he saw a beautiful young girl, so like the last that he thought for a moment it the same. But then he saw her, now a comely matron sitting opposite her daughter. And the noise in the room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children in there than Scrooge could possibly count. And then there was a knocking on the door, and such a rush ensued to open it, and just in time because the father came home, accompanied by a man laden with Christmas presents and toys. Well, you can imagine the onslaught that was made on this poor defenseless porter. But then Scrooge looked on with more attention than ever when he saw the master of the house with his daughter leaning fondly upon him and sit by his own fireside. And when he thought that just such another creature, quite as graceful and full of promise, might have called him father, his eye grew very dim indeed. The husband spoke. Belle, I saw a good friend of yours, an old friend of yours this afternoon. Well, who could that be? Mr. Scrooge. I happened to walk by his office, and the window shutters were still up, so I couldn't help but look in and see him. There he was, all alone. His partner lies upon the point of death, so I hear. And there Mr. Scrooge sat, all alone, quite alone in the world, I do believe. Spirit, remove me from this place. I cannot bear it. I told you, these are the shadows that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me. Scrooge put his face in his hands and he wept. And when he looked up, the ghost was gone. He was alone. And becoming aware of an overwhelming drowsiness, barely had time to stagger to bed before he sank into a deep sleep. And when he awoke, he had no occasion to be told that the hour was once again on the stroke of 1. As he lay in bed, he became aware that he was at the very core and center of a blazing light. He got out of bed and put his slippers on and shuffled toward the door. His hand was barely on the lock when a strange voice bade him enter. It was his room, but it had undergone a surprising transformation and was so hung with living green that it looked like a veritable grove. Heaped upon the floor to form a sort of throne were geese, turkeys, brawn, suckling pigs, great shanks of meat, mincemeat pies, plum puddings, and steaming bowls of punch. Sitting in easy state upon this couch was a jolly giant, glorious to behold. "Come in, man, come on in, and know me better. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was dressed in a green mantle or robe which was trimmed with fur and hung so loosely on the figure that its large capacious breast was laid bare. "Ha ha ha! You've never seen the likes of me before." Scrooge admitted that he had not. "Spirit, last night I went forth on compulsion. Oh, but I've learned a lesson that is working yet. If you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe." Scrooge did so, and instantly everything disappeared. And they were now on Christmas morning on a busy street that led to Bob Cratchit's house, for that's where they went. The spirit stopped on the threshold of Bob Cratchit's door to bless his poor dwelling. Inside, they saw Mrs. Cratchit, dressed but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons which make a goodly show and are cheap and only cost 6pence. She was setting the table, assisted by Miss Belinda Cratchit, second of her two daughters, also brave in ribbons. And next, 2 little Cratchits came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it as their own. "Oh, what has got your precious father then? And Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't this late last year by half an hour? Why, here's Martha, mother. Why, how late you are, my dear," she cried, kissing her again and again. "No, but never you mind, as long as you are come. Well, we had a great deal of work to do last night, mother, and we had to go in this morning and clear away. Oh, well, never ye mind, as long as you are come. Oh, sit you down by the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless you." "No, no," cried the little Cratchits. "Hide, Martha, hide. Here's father." So Martha got up and hid, and in came little Bob the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter hanging down before him, exclusive of the fringe, and his clothes darned and pressed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim. He bore a crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" said Bob with a sudden declension in his spirits. "Oh, she's not coming." "Not coming on Christmas Day?" Well, Martha didn't like to see her father so disappointed, even if it were only a joke, so she ran out from behind the closet door prematurely, ran into his one free arm, kissed him, and then the two little Cratchits took Tiny Tim out to the wash house so that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. And how did Tiny Tim behave, Robert? As good as gold, and better. He gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and says the strangest things. On the way home, he said that he hoped people in the church would see him because he was a cripple. It might be pleasant for them to remember on Christmas Day who made blind men see and lame men walk. Oh, and then they heard his active little crutch came in, accompanied by his brother and sister, and they helped him to his little seat by the fire. And then Bob compounded some hot stuff with gin and lemons and put it on the hob to simmer. Meanwhile, the two ubiquitous Cratchits and Master Peter went outside to fetch the goose, with which they came back in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Martha sweetened the applesauce. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. And Martha dusted off the plates and put them on the table. All gathered around, and Bob had Tiny Tim near him at the corner. And once grace was said, Mrs. Cratchit took the carving knife and prepared to plunge it into the breast of the goose. And when she did, and when the long-anticipated gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight rose around the board. Oh, what a goose! Its size and tenderness and cheapness were the universal themes of admiration, eked out by plenty of applesauce and mashed potatoes. It made a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Now, when they were finished, the plates were changed, and Mrs. Cratchit disappeared and came back, smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, and benighted in a quart of brandy with a sprig of holly in the top. Oh, what a pudding! Bob Cratchit considered it to be Mrs. Cratchit's greatest achievement since their marriage. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or even thought that it was such a tiny pudding for such a large family. Any Cratchit would have blushed to even hint at such a thing. Well, when they were finished and the table cleared, the hearth swept, and a shovelful of chestnuts thrown onto the fire, the hot stuff in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, the family gathered around the hearth. The family's collection of glass was at Bob Cratchit's elbow, some mismatched tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. But these held the hot stuff just as well as golden goblets would have done. When they all had their glasses, Bob Cratchit raised his glass into the air and said, "Merry Christmas, my dears. God bless us." To which the whole family re-echoed, "God bless us, every one," cried Tiny Tim, the last of all. And that's the end of Act 1. Thank you. Thank you. So go, take a break, get some coffee, maybe some cookies, and I'll see you in about 10 minutes or so.
Even if you're not back, we're going to start again. So this is big fun, don't you think? What a feat of memory. Just incredible. And brilliant editing. I got to learn a little bit about the backstory of where you came by your version of this, and that's equally fascinating. And here's another green form. Anybody else? A green form you want to pass forward? Just hand it to the person in front of you, and they'll be glad to bring it up here. Did you get one of the entrance tickets to make the gate rise when you came in tonight? Yes. So I found the password to get out is your Social Security number. And if you believe that, I really am a storyteller. So I'm going to throw this out real quick. It's something I heard, and Jennifer, maybe you know the answer to this too, but hush up. Have you all heard of the volcanic eruption in the 1800s in a place called Krakatoa? It's kind of well known. It was like the largest volcanic eruption ever recorded, and the fallout from that, literally and figuratively, is that it changed our climate here for a good while, many years. We had colder winters and wetter and snowier winters in the northern hemisphere about the time when Charles Dickens was a young man. And he began to experience snowy Christmases in London. And that's hadn't necessarily been common always, but it was during his youth, which a lot of people think perhaps the first 8 years of his life. There you go. So he had those memories, but this was from something that, he got to experience that kind of weather at Christmas from something that happened on the other side of the world and changed our climate for a period of years. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. I'm glad I could share that with you. And now let's see who wins these 2 tickets I have in my pocket. Joyce and I will do the deed. I note there are no $20 bills in here. Is that you, sir? Your name is Doris? No. Is it Walter Marshner? Walter. Okay. Present. I will get these tickets to you. I'll bring them to you when I come off the stage. So I want to thank Jennifer again, and we'll all give her a round of applause for a beautiful show here tonight about a classic we probably all know and have experienced through movies, or maybe you read the book yourself. But isn't it grand to have it face-to-face like this with a skilled artist giving this her rendition?
And just a reminder that we are still with the ghost of Christmas present, and we are gathered around the hearth at the dwelling of Bob Cratchit. Bob sat very close to Tiny Tim's side, and he held his withered little hand in his as if he loved the child and dreaded that he might be taken from him. Spirit, said Scrooge with an interest that he'd never felt before. Will Tiny Tim live? I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch carefully preserved without an owner. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. Oh no, no, kind spirit, say he will be spared. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. Well, what then? If he be like to die, eh? He'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge hung his head in shame to hear the ghost quote his own words, but lifted it again on hearing his name. It was Bob Cratchit. He had a glass that he was holding high into the air. I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. Founder of the feast, indeed. Oh, I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and hope he'd have a good appetite for it. My dear, said Bob, the children, Christmas Day. Well, it should be Christmas Day, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard-feeling man as Mr. Scrooge is. Oh, you know he is, Robert. No one knows it better than you do, poor fellow. My dear, Christmas Day. Well, I'll drink his health for the day's sake and for yours, not for his. Merry Christmas to him, and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy indeed, I have no doubt. And then the rest of the Cratchit family, and it has to be admitted rather reluctantly, drank to Mr. Scrooge's health. Well, there was nothing of very high mark in any of this. They were not a handsome family, and they certainly were not very well dressed, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were grateful, happy, pleased with one another, and content with the time. And when they faded at last, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially Tiny Tim, until at last he faded away. And then they were once more on a busy street. It was now getting dark, and they went to Scrooge's nephew's house. Inside a bright, gleaming room, Scrooge was surprised to hear his own name again. It was Fred, his nephew, addressing the company. Uncle Scrooge said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live, and he believed it too. Well, more shame for him, Fred, said Scrooge's niece by marriage. Well, he's not as pleasant as he might be, but his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Well, I have no patience with him, and the rest of the company agreed with her. Oh, I have. Here he takes it into his head not to like us, and he won't come for dinner. Well, what are the consequences? He loses some pleasant moments that might do him some good. And it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. And here we have a glass of mulled wine ready to hand. And so I say, Uncle Scrooge. Well, Uncle Scrooge, they all cried. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is. Well, Uncle Scrooge had become so imperceptibly light and gay, he would have pledged the unconscious company in return, had the ghost given him time. But they were once more back on their travels. Much they saw, far they went, many homes they visited. But at last the ghost observed that his time upon this globe was growing short. Listen, he said. They could hear the clock striking the 11:15, when Scrooge happened to glance down. Forgive me if I'm not justified in what I ask, but I see something protruding from your skirts and not belonging to yourself. Is it a foot or a claw? Well, it might be a claw for all the flesh there is upon it. And the ghost withdrew from the folds of its robe 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were wretched, hideous, miserable, wolfish. Scrooge started back in alarm. Spirit, are they yours? No, they are man's. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both and all of their degree. But above all, beware this boy, for I see written upon his brow that which is doom. Have they no refuge or resource? Are there no prisons? Said the ghost, turning upon him for the very last time with his own words. Are there no workhouses? The clock struck 12. When the last stroke ceased to vibrate, Scrooge looked about him for the ghost, but saw it not. And on that last reverberation, he remembered old Jacob Marley's prediction, and looking up, he saw a solemn phantom coming like a mist along the ground toward him. It was shrouded in a deep black garment that concealed its head, its face, its form. Nothing was visible save one outstretched hand. Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? The phantom answered not, but merely pointed onwards. Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any other spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, I am prepared to accompany you, and with a thankful heart. Oh, will you not speak to me? In answer, it merely pointed onwards. Lead on, lead on. It glided away, and Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which carried him along, he thought. They went through the busy thoroughfares until they ended on 'Change among the merchants. The phantom pointed to a little knot of businessmen. Scrooge approached to listen to their talk. No, said a monstrous fat man with a great chin. I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead. When did he die? Oh, last night, I do believe. Why, whatever was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die. God knows. All I know is he's dead, and that it's likely to be a very cheap funeral, for I know of no one going to it. Oh, I say, why don't we make up a party and volunteer? Oh, I don't mind going as long as lunch is provided, but I must be fed if I go. Well, there was general laughter at this before speakers and listeners went their separate ways. Scrooge looked to the phantom for an explanation, but none was forthcoming. It glided on into a street that was familiar to Scrooge, for he went there often. But though the clock pointed to the hour which normally would find him there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes. And again, the phantom merely turned and walked away, and then led Scrooge into a part of the town that he had never penetrated before, but he knew its situation. The ways were foul and narrow, the people slipshod, half drunken, half naked. Far in this den of infamous resort was a low-browed beetling shop where iron, rags, bones, bottle, and greasy offal were bought. Sitting among his wares was a grey-haired rascal of about 70 years of age, who was smoking his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Now, the Phantom and Scrooge arrived in the presence of this man just as a woman slunk into the shop carrying a heavy bundle. She was immediately followed by another woman, similarly laden, who was followed by a man dressed in faded black, who was no less surprised to see them than they had been on recognition of one another. After a blank moment of astonishment, all three burst into laughter. "Oh, let the charwoman alone to be the first, let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Ha ha! Look here, old Joey, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it. Oh, you couldn't have come to a better place. Come on into the parlour." The parlour was a space behind a screen of rags. Old Joe poked at the fire with a stair rod. Meanwhile, the woman who had spoken dropped her heavy bundle on the floor and sat on a stool in a flaunting manner. "Well, what odds, Mrs. Dilber, what odds? Everyone has a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "Oh, yes, indeed. No man more so." "Well, why stand there staring as if you was afraid, woman? Who's the worse off for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose?" "Oh, no, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber. "Look, if he wanted to keep 'em after he was dead, wicked old screw, why wasn't he more natural in his lifetime? If he had have been, he'd have had somebody to take care of him when he was struck with death, instead of lying there, gasping out his last breath all alone." No truer word was ever spoken. "Go on, old Joe, open up my bundle." But the gallantry of her friends would not allow for this, and so the man in faded black produced his plunder. It was not very extensive, a seal or two, a pencil case, and 2 shirt-sleeve buttons, and a little brooch of very little value. Old Joe appraised each item and chalked the amount he was disposed to give upon the wall. Mrs. Dilber went next. Some clothing, wearing apparel, sheets and towels, a few old boots, and a pair of old-fashioned sugar spoons. Her account was stated in the same manner. "Now, go on, old Joe, open up my bundle." Old Joe went down upon his knees, the better to open and undo all the knots, and then he pulled out a roll of dark, heavy stuff. "What do you call this? Bed curtains? You don't mean to say that you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there?" "I do. Oh, you were born to make your fortune. Now, don't you spill any oil on those blankets, Joe." "His blankets? Who else do you think? He ain't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say. And you can look through that shirt till your eyes ache. You won't find a hole in it. It was the best he had. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me." "What do you mean by wasting it?" "Somebody was fool enough to put it on him to be buried in. But I took it off again and put on an old calico one. It's quite as becoming to the body." Well, they all laughed at this, and then old Joe took out a flannel bag and told out their several gains upon the floor. "So, no, this is an end to it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead. All four burst into laughter. I see, Spirit. The fate of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Oh, merciful heavens, what is this? For the scene had changed, and Scrooge was almost touching a bed. It was a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, lay the body of a man, unwashed, unwept, uncared for. The phantom pointed to the man's head, and Scrooge thought to himself how easy it would be for him to reach out and pull back the sheet to reveal the man's identity. But he had no more power to do so than to dismiss the spectre at its side. Oh, this is a dreadful place, Spirit. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me. Oh, please, let us go. But the phantom continued to point at the head. I understand you, and I would if I could, but I have not the power. I have not the power. In answer, in silence, the phantom glided away and took him along a street. It was the city street that led to Bob Cratchit's house. Inside, they saw Mrs. Cratchit and the Cratchit children gathered around the hearth. Quiet. Very quiet. Mrs. Cratchit and the girls were busy at their sewing, and the two noisy little Cratchits stood as still as statues in the corner. But surely they were very quiet. At length, Mrs. Cratchit put down her work upon the table. The colour hurts my eyes and makes them weak by candlelight. Oh, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father for the world. Oh, it must be near his time. Past it rather, Mother, said Peter. But I think he's walked a little more slowly these past few evenings. Again, they were very quiet. And then Mrs. Cratchit spoke in a voice that was quite cheerful and only faltered once. Oh, I have known him walk very fast indeed, with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. But he was very light to carry, and your father loved him so. It was no trouble at all. Oh, here's your precious father then. She got up and she ran to meet him, and in came Bob. He was wearing his comforter. Poor fellow, he had need of it. His tea was already for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it the most. And then he sat down, and the two little Cratchits climbed upon his knees, and each laid a tiny cheek against his face, as if to say, "Don't mind it, father, don't be grieved." But Bob was very cheerful and spoke pleasantly to them all. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and hard work of Mrs. Cratchit and his daughters. "Well, did you go today then, Robert?" "Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. Oh, it would have done your heart good to see what a green, what a pleasant place it is. But of course, you'll see it often. It's just that I promised I would go there on a Sunday. My child, my little child." He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. fellow. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him, his 2 daughters kissed him, the 2 little Cratchits kissed him, and he and Peter shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childlike essence was from God. The scene faded, and they were once more on a busy street that led to Scrooge's office. It was an office still. The shutters were still up. He looked inside, but it was not his office. And the furniture was not his furniture, and the man sitting in the chair was not himself. And again the spirit glided away and led him to the outskirts of town, to a street that ended with an iron gate, the churchyard. So here then, the man whose name he would soon learn lay buried beneath the ground. The phantom glided in and out among the graves, stopped and pointed down at one. Trembling, Scrooge approached, and looking down on the stone of the neglected grave, read his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man that lay upon the bed? The phantom pointed to the stone, to Scrooge, and back again. No, kind spirit, no. Surely your nature intercedes and pities me. Assure me that I may wipe away the writing on this stone. For the first time, the hand appeared to shake. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me all of this if I am beyond all hope? For the first time, the kind hand appeared to tremble. I will honor Christmas in my heart and endeavor to keep it the whole year through. Oh, assure me that I may wipe away the writing on this stone. In his agony, he caught hold of the spectral hand, but the ghost, stronger than Scrooge, repulsed him, holding up his hands in one last effort to have his fate reversed. He saw an alteration in the phantom's hood. It shrank, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. And the bedpost was his own. The bedchamber was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time ahead of him was his own to make amends in. He scrambled out of bed. Oh, Christmas and the heavens be praised for this. On my knees, oh Jacob, on my knees. He saw his bed curtains, and he held them to his breast. Oh, they are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. Oh, I am here. Oh, I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather, happy as an angel, merry as a schoolboy. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas to the whole world. Whoop-a-loo! He had frisked into the living room where he stood, perfectly winded. When he recovered, he went over to the window, threw up the sash, and looked down into the street. There was a small boy dressed in his Sunday best. What's today, my fine fellow? What, today? It's Christmas Day. Oh, I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Oh, of course they have this. They can do anything they want. Oh, hello, my fine fellow. Hello. Do you happen to know the Poulterers? 2 streets over, but one on the corner. Well, I should hope I did. Oh, what a remarkable boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. Do you happen to know if the prize turkey is still hanging there. Not the little prize turkey, but the big one. What, the one as big as me? What a remarkable boy. Yes, it's hanging there now. Well, go and buy it. Tell the man to bring it here so I might tell him where to take it. Come back with the man, I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sent it. Oh, that turkey's twice as big as Tiny Tim. It was a bird, that was. It never could have stood on its own 2 legs. It would have snapped them off short in half a minute like 2 sticks of sealing wax. When Scrooge saw the size of it, he said, "Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. You must have a cab." The chuckle with which he paid for the cab, the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down and chuckled until he wept. And then he got dressed in his best and at last went out into the streets. He hadn't got very far when he saw coming towards him one of the portly gentlemen who had come into his counting house the day before. Oh, it sent a pang across Scrooge's heart when he thought how this old gentleman would look upon him. But he knew what path lay straight ahead, and he took it. Good day to you, sir. A Merry Christmas to you. Now, I do hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. Mr. Scrooge? That is my name, and I fear it might not be pleasant to you. Allow me to beg your pardon. And would you have the goodness... Here Scrooge whispered in the old gentleman's ear. Why, bless my heart, are you perfectly serious, Mr. Scrooge? If you please, not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in that, I do assure you. Well, Mr. Scrooge, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything at all. But will you come and see me? Will you do me that favour? Oh, I will. And it was quite clear he meant to do so. Well, then Scrooge went to church, and when he came out, he patted children on the head. He looked down into kitchens and up into windows and found that all could yield him pleasure. In the afternoon, he went toward his nephew's house. Oh, he passed it 12 times before he found the courage, but in a last dash, he ran up to the door and did it. Is your master at home, my dear? Yes, sir. He's in the dining room with Mrs. I'll show you in if you please, sir. I thank you. He knows me. I'll go in here. He already had his hand on the lock. He opened the door, opened it, and sidled in his face. Fred, dear heart alive, how his niece by marriage started. Why, Lord bless me, who's that? It is I, your Uncle Scrooge, Fred. I've come for dinner. Will you let me in? Let him in. It's a wonder he didn't shake his hand off. He was at home in less than 5 minutes. His niece looked just the same. All the company looked just the same when they arrived. Wonderful dinner, wonderful games, wonderful happiness. Oh, that he was at the office all the earlier the next morning. He wanted to catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That's what he'd set his heart upon. And he did it too. 9 o'clock, no Bob. 9:15, no Bob. Bob Cratchit was a full 18.5 minutes late. Before he came in, he'd already taken off his hat and his cravat, and then he sat on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," growled Scrooge. "What do you mean by coming in at this time of the day?" I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time." "Yes, I think you are. Please step this way, if you don't mind." "I'm very sorry, sir. It won't be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Well, I'll tell you what, my fine fellow. I'm not going to stand for this any more, and therefore—" He gave Bob such a dig in his waistcoat that poor Bob fell backwards into the tank again. "And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary." Bob, trembling, looked at the ruler and had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to people out in the court for help and a straitjacket. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken. "A Merry Christmas, Bob, a merrier Christmas than I've given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavour to help your struggling family. Oh, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a steaming bowl of Christmas bishop, Bob. Now, make up the fires, buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." And he did it all. He was better than his word. He did infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he became a second father. He became as good a man, as good a master, as good a friend, as good a man as the good old city knew. Now, there were some people who laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh. He was wise enough to know that nothing happens for good on this globe at which some folks don't have a good laugh at the outset. His own heart laughed, and that was good enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, what did he say? God bless us, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Jennifer, thanks so much. And I would like, on behalf of Storytelling Arts, I'd like to thank you and all those other people you brought with you for giving us this wonderful rendition of that story tonight. Guys, we'll see you back here in January on the 13th, and it's Carol Moore and MJ Lang who will be telling love stories. Drive careful. See you next time.
Thank you.